Well, blessing, there's four of us.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming in person, and thanks Phil and Nancy for joining in on Zoom.
And
And
don't forget Phil.
well, Phil, didn't I say Phil? I meant to say
No,
Phil.
I don't, I thought.
You're right, I
just
said,
heard
you're right, I
Nancy.
just said Nancy, yeah. In my mind, I said Phil too. but I
Morning,
didn't.
Phil.
Good morning, Phil.
I still.
So last week, we just said I was sick, so we played the movie and you enjoyed it? Yeah, it's a nice documentary, isn't it? Yeah.
It's so nice,
Documentary about the Baal Shem Tov. Did it make him come alive a little bit
Yeah.
to see the
definitely.
place where he lived and all these comments?
I did meant to re-watch it. Who was the narrator?
So near was a rabbi, Mark Soloway, who's
Uh-huh.
he's a conservative rabbi in
was
in
good.
Boulder.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Just curious.
He's at the British guy, but he's at the synagogue where Stacy Flint ended up working for a
That's
little
what
while.
I thought,
Yeah, yeah. So he was. So I don't know if you noticed, but one of the first people, well, the voice singing at the beginning of the documentary was singing the Niggun, the melody of the Baal Shem Tov. That was Mimi Feigelson, who once did a class with us here.
Oh,
And she's someone that was pretty close to rabbinical school and a family friend.
Okay. And then
She's
she was
the-
interviewed.
Yeah,
later
she was the
on,
one who was
yeah.
interviewed at some point. So they were, the documentary was really some of the who's who in the Hassidic
Stacy's not
scholars.
working at
Yeah.
that synagogue anymore?
Stacy isn't, as for a while, she was the head of diversity for the federations of North America,
Oh.
Jewish Federations of North America. So she did something else. I don't know what, not sure where she is now, but she seems to be active on Facebook. So. Anybody have any enduring comments or thoughts from that about the Baal Shem Tov that stayed with them from last
It
week?
just made them
Yeah.
be more real.
Yeah, go ahead.
The one comment that I don't know if I made, but that his whole approach was believing in love
Yeah,
rather than in fear,
yeah,
because it seemed like the Niggun,
yeah,
their whole thing was like the fear of God,
yeah.
and his was the love of God and the love of their people.
Mm.
So that, kind of stuff.
Beautiful.
Yeah, a lot of Christian friends that I've had in college used to say that the Old Testament scared them because it seemed like, it was a frightening thing, yeah. And like
Yeah.
God was somebody to be afraid of. I said, it just depends on how you look at it.
Yeah.
What you do.
What you do, right? Don't be bad and God won't get you.
Interesting. That's good comments. Well, as I said at some point, the Nagdim were, because, once you make God the purpose of all of it, if you're praying and you're feeling love,
Right.
just like, you do anything for a person you love, at a certain point your prayer extends, and the Nagdim were not too happy about the Hassidim's approach, that they felt they were in love with God. It felt a little out of control to meet Nagdim a little bit. So, anybody else have any other comments or images from the movie that stayed with them? Feelings? Nice.
What's the name of this documentary? I'm sure I can find it on YouTube if I
Yeah,
title.
something on fire, forest and
Yeah,
fire,
Forest on Fire.
forest on fire.
Forest
Yeah.
on Fire, okay.
You gotta be careful, because there are other movies and I think books about
Yes,
literally forests on fire.
there's a book about the
So-
Baal Shem Tov, Forest on Fire, but
Well,
this
no,
is-
no, but I think there are other things about
okay.
like firefighters
Got
and,
it.
and stuff. So you might, even if you just put in Forest on Fire, it may not show up at the top of the list. So just keep looking for it.
Okay, Ellen, thank you.
Look up Baal Shem Tov, Forest on
Yeah.
Fire, Baal Shem Tov.
Yeah.
And,
Slash
Ellen-
Baal Shem Tov, yeah,
and Baal has two A's, and
yeah.
on YouTube you'll find it. Okay, very good. So today, what we're gonna do last week, we're doing this week instead, is we're gonna look at maybe the area where there was the most kind of innovation by the Baal Shem Tov and then really from the world of Hassidim, which is in the world of prayer. And I was going to share one of the stories about the Baal Shem Tov. It's from, so a lot of the stories you have of the Hassidim are from a book called Tales of the Hassidim by Martin Buber, which was a very popular book back in the 60s and 70s, and kind of introduced the world to Hassidim, and not just among Jews, but among others. And that's a great book. But the way he writes the stories, they're a little bit sparse because he's a bit of a scholar. But one of the great stories of the Baal Shem Tov in prayer was there was, it was like his community was a synagogue. So one day was Rosh Chodesh, and it was time for Rosh Chodesh prayers, just like we have Rosh Chodesh prayers here at the Minyan. And he went to the synagogue and he took his place among, the worshipers, and they got to the first blessing. And suddenly they saw that the Baal Shem Tov began to tremble a little bit. And this wasn't anything new, because they knew that sometimes he got so, the powerful spirit of prayer that was in him would make him tremble a little bit with its force. But this time he was literally shaking from head to toe. Like he was totally like, and then he used to lead part of the services. So at a certain point, it was his turn to go up and lead the services. But he was so like into the prayer, so overcome him that he couldn't move. So one of his Chassidim approached and he tried to help him, but he said that he looked into his eyes and his eyes looked like two orbs of kind of light, just totally, his face was totally, he was in some far off place. And so two people came and they guided him slowly to the head of the thing, and then he started in a quavering voice, start to say the prayers, but they were so powerful, everybody else was just taken into it. And he continued to pray, chanting out loud. He did the Hallel and he did the Kaddish, and then he went back. And then at a certain point, his body grew completely still, and he just went into some kind of deep meditative state. They continued on with all of it. They read the Torah, they did everything, but they all said nobody ever forgot the feeling of being in their room in their Rosh Chodesh. And just so it's hard for us to think about what that would be like, because we don't experience people who have that intense level of. But if you think that there are, if maybe when we were at the Western Wall on that Friday night, some years ago as a congregation, and we're suddenly the spirit of it, and everybody was just like, it was like explosive, the spirit of it, suddenly everybody was into it, and so if you take that and you make it even more intense, and you get really one of the things that he was about was this idea of transformative experiences, spiritual experiences, and so we get little tastes of them, and in our life we get more. Where he brought such powerful experiences that I think that's really what creates a new religious movement, right? When you have something, because it changes people's lives, right? When you experience that changes your life. So then you suddenly become a student of a person who has that kind of charisma and spiritual power.
Get carried away with it.
You get carried away with it. Yeah, you get carried away with it. So you can see why the Mitnagdim were, if they didn't, once a lot of them came and then experienced it, became Hassidim, but those who didn't experience it, they just heard about it and they were like, whoa.
Carried into it.
Yeah, they thought carried into it. And so they said, what is going on? And why are these crazy people? Who are these crazy people, right? So that's but the people who experience it, and I think, at least in my mind, the difference between that and a negative version of that is that, the person is not like a cult, because they're not asking you to do anything negative. It's open, and because it's not based on mind control and telling you to do a certain thing, it's just someone who has that kind of spiritual charisma. So anyway, but this is part of why both it swept the whole Jewish world, and within a few generations, half of all of Europe was Hassidic. And it's also why the other people who weren't as into it felt what they're doing is not what we'd be doing. And even as I said, that some of the Mitnagdim, some of them were into very spiritual Kabbalistic stuff, but they were very elitist. They said, this is something we do once a week. There was like these little Kabbalistic minyan. A minyan, right, is a Jewish prayer service, and the rabbis would go and, they'd follow Kabbalah, and they would do visualizations of 100 letters of God's name, and then switch them around and have them spin, and they do these really intense things, but they would not introduce it to the people.
I
They
was gonna
thought this
say,
is
did they
just,
include all the
they didn't
people?
include that because it was their little kind of, and so, but the Baal Shem Tov, he was all about, he was all experiential, and it was all about bringing people into it, and they felt not only were they wild, but they felt they're giving away the secrets and not preserving it in the way they should, and so they were very upset.
That's what we're
Again,
trying to
yeah.
do on Shabbat, find a way to get people more
Yeah,
into
it's,
it
and so,
spiritually,
and I
but
think, and you, that's what people were saying we had the musical Shabbat last week, right, and someone was saying, oh, it's the music makes it easier, because you can feel the spirit, the soulfulness more, and so that, so that's kind of what we're trying to do, is bridge a little bit of that experience, and,
I think music gets into your soul more
Yeah.
than words.
exactly, the melodies that they would use, right, the Hassidic melodies are melodies that get into your soul. But it wasn't, so as part of that, and it's also, he just had, both it was experiential, so, if you don't experience it, it just sounds a little crazy, but if you experience it and inside of yourself, like any experience, you have to decide, does it feel good to you or not? And so I think most people who came in contact with this felt, wow, this feels really good, I want more of that, right? That's how it works, right? And so I think it's different than comparing it to other things that we might be inclined to compare it to.
That's funny, the way you just said how it works, because the big thing in AA, chapter 5, is
Yeah.
called how it works.
Oh, really?
And it's the same thing, when you grasp that, then you get the concept of how somebody can get help
Interesting.
within AA.
And I think it's a good comparison, because
Yeah.
there's certain things that work with human consciousness,
Right.
and right, so this is like something, the work, the certain ways to make prayer come alive, for people, and part of it is if you experience it, that's why I brought the musical Shabbat, because I wanted to, try and experience, a really joyful, kind of inspiring service, and then you want to do it other times, even when there's not musical Shabbat, right? So that's kind of the part of, but it takes a long time to get to it, and, if we had the Baal Shem Tov with us, maybe we'd all
Yeah,
get
right.
swept up and we wouldn't need anything, because he would have that kind of, that kind of intensity, but
But
maybe
if
we can
some
make it
guy
happen.
came in looking like that and try to help us do that, people might think that he was, kind of.
Yeah. They might, unless it
Until
was,
they allow themselves.
yeah, you maybe have to allow yourself to get into it. But on the other hand, I think that those who are at that level of the Baal Shem Tov, even those who sometimes don't allow themselves, they get swept up in it, and they're like, wow, this is, because they feel that it's about love, right? You feel love, and it doesn't feel like you're going wild, but it just feels like you're swept up in something really beautiful. So, but it wasn't only a feeling, was also a whole theology that he built around it of what prayer was about. And look, it's not like he invented it. We read this in our class together, right? The stories of Saul, and he encounters a band of prophets in biblical times, and suddenly he catches the spirit of their prophecy, and he himself becomes part of the prophets. And so, right, there's a sense that in cultures that have that intense spirituality, that spirituality is contagious, you feel it, and in our modern world, we have this big separation because of the Enlightenment and kind of like the rational world, and then this thing, but I think in pre-modern, definitely it was more a sense of,
Today people catch
yeah,
other things.
yeah,
You become a fan of Beyonce or Taylor
Yeah.
Swift
Yeah.
or whatever, and you get
swept up in the
or Leonard
concert.
Cohen or whoever you
Yeah,
want, but
yeah,
you kind of get
Interesting.
sucked in, and it becomes your life, or an important part of your life.
The
And
Grateful
we've
Dead.
kind of or the Grateful Dead. You
Talk
know,
about charisma.
it's kind of replaced the religious fervor.
yeah, it's interesting. there is some of that spirit in all of that, and I wonder if it nourishes as much. I mean, right, Shlomo Karlebach, who had his problems, but was an incredible charismatic leader. I mean, he started his whole career in San Francisco in the 60s, and he had his, he was a gifted musician, obviously, and he had a place called the House of Love and Prayer. And he was trying to get the Jews who were otherwise the hippies in San Francisco to come to his thing. And he played after the Grateful Dead sometimes. And he would get on stage and he would shield his eyes and he would say, "Everybody put on your clothes." And because he was an Orthodox Rabbi. So after they, then they put up their clothes and then he would say, "Okay, now I'm ready." And he would play, and he was kind of part of all that for good and for bad, but he had some of that charisma and some great stories of.
It's always sad with people like that, though, who go off on a tangent for a while. and
Yeah.
get in trouble in this.
Well, part of it is, I think, some of those people who, saw their mission, their spiritual mission to help people at a certain time and place, and that time and place had some excesses that they were unable to resist. And also, you come from Shlomo Karlebach, not that it excuses anything that he did, but he came from a very, very kind of narrow world with very
But
very
people wanna
narrow
remember
values.
that instead of the good stuff.
Exactly, so it's, we have a lot of. It's a whole conversation about artists,
Yeah. that would be good.
Picasso and,
Right.
and King David and,
Right.
and. there's
That
a
would
lot
be a
of-
good class.
That would be a good class, yeah, the artists who create beautiful art, but then go astray in other ways, and how do we reconcile but. Yeah. I definitely make one lose a lot of respect for a person or completely when you know what they've done. But one of the things that I think I appreciate about the Hasidim, the early Hasidim, is from what you read, they didn't have the problem of charismatic people in our modern world who are encountering the modern society. Part of it because they lived their whole lives contained still in a very traditional society, and so they basically lived traditional lives, and they weren't in an encounter the 60s, which if they had, I don't know what
Woodstock.
happened. Yeah, not sure if what happened. Baal Shem Tov lived at the time of Woodstock. What would have happened? But
You might have been able to get them.
but maybe not. Maybe not. But maybe he would have maintained.
He might have
his-
had a great rock band.
He might have had a great rock band. The Baal Shem Tov and the Souls on Fire. Yeah, fiery souls. But again, and let's get to our study. But there were these very old ideas that go back to just basic Judaism. What does it mean to be a person who leads? What do you need to lead a service? So this is pre-days where you had cantors of professional voices. And what the halacha says, to be a cantor, for example, all you need is a sweet voice. That's what it says. You need a sweet voice and a kind of a nice inner life. And that's what it means to be, that's what you need to be a shaliach tzibur. Doesn't mean you need a perfect voice. You just need a nice feeling inside of yourself. And so, that's what the Hasidim were saying, and they just they just emphasized that side of things, instead of emphasizing the outer, they emphasize the inner. And the Baal Shem Tov was also a genius in his interpretations of Torah, and that also what's made him, because he was working from within the tradition, and I think that's why, it became integrated within Judaism without creating this horrible rift on a long-term basis, because he was working from within Judaism and just emphasizing certain things and used all, as we saw a few weeks ago, using all the traditional commentaries and all the traditional views, and he wasn't a revolutionary in that sense, but he was just bringing out the spiritual side. And maybe religion needs that every now and then when it gets a little too focused on other things. So let's get to maybe one of his most important teachings, the Baal Shem Tov on prayer. I've been talking about this for a while in services too. But Alan, let's go ahead. This is from the story of Noah and God's commandment to Noah to make the ark.
Make an opening for daylight in the ark and terminate it within a cubit of the top. Put the entrance to the ark on it, in its side, make it with bottom, second, and third decks.
Okay, so this is basic instructions for constructing the ark. You know, God has these instructions. Well, this is Rashi's innovative interpretation of what that means.
Okay,
Oh, sorry, this is not Rashi. This is Rashi, and then we'll get to Baal Shem Tov. So this is, go ahead, Rashi.
okay, an opening. Some say this was a window. Others say it was a precious stone that gave light to them.
Okay, so this is
Hmm.
Rashi bringing a midrash where when it says make an opening for the ark, the word for opening can also mean light. So he said maybe he was saying bring in a precious stone that gave light to them. Okay, this is the richness of Jewish tradition, right? We have all kinds of different interpretations. But the Baal Shem Tov uses that tradition to go on the whole other way. Go ahead.
The Baal Shem Tov said, you shall make a window sohar for the ark, teva. That the word teva, which a person speaks in Torah study or in prayer, should be illuminated. Matzir.
So the word teva, which means ark, also means word. So he's just totally rereading that sentence to mean that every word should have a light. This is the Hassidic way of interpreting text. Go ahead.
Because within each Hebrew letter, there are worlds, souls, and divinity that ascend and join and unite with each other with the divine. Afterwards, the letters unite and join together to form a word. And then the words unite and create real unions in the realm of the divine. And a person needs to put his whole soul into each and every aspect that we have mentioned. Then all the worlds will unite as one and ascend with unbounded joy and great bliss. What does it mean to illuminate your words? Can you give an example of illuminated words?
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, yeah, what does it mean to you? I mean, he gives us very poetic, spiritual, mystical kind of interpretation, but what does it mean to you to have
Sometimes haven't you heard people use the expression, I know that speaks to me.
okay, nice. It's like the
Sometimes I
words,
hear
the words
words,
really connect
it
to you.
connects, right, so what can be like illuminated.
Beautiful.
Rabbi, can you explain what is meant by within each Hebrew letter, there are worlds, souls, and divinity? I understand if they're there, how they can ascend and join and all that stuff. I'm having difficulty conceiving of worlds, souls, and divinity in each Hebrew letter.
I think what he's saying is that, right, we have this idea that that the Hebrew language is a holy language, and that God created the Hebrew language, so to speak, to create the world, right? But I think one way for us to understand is that the Hebrew language is connected to a kind of cosmic experience of creation and of, cosmic happenings. And so that every Hebrew letter has a special resonance that you can link to some kind of cosmic thing. And so that's what it means that it's a holy language, right? So you say these words like the bet or the aleph, and it's not just a regular language, but it has a spiritual power and resonance, because this is the language that was God used to create the world. Or just maybe this is what any holy language is it has this spiritual resonance that when you use it, it feels you're connecting to a different realm. So we have this Kabbalistic idea of thousands of worlds and obviously billions of souls. And so that these are the letters, like each letter, and there's a whole tradition, even not in Kabbalah, but of we're right now in the Torah, we're talking about Betzalel, who was the artisan who created a tabernacle, and that he used the power of the Hebrew letters to create the tabernacle, the spiritual power. And that he was using, that was linking into the power of creation. I mean, these are really mystical ideas, but I think what it's saying is that the Hebrew language has power to it. And that you can kind of bring in that power when you pray, if you link yourself in a certain way. But I think it's also saying about the power of prayer. When you pray, you're not just saying things, but if you bring that intention to it, you can really have something that's powerful,
So
and
it's communicating.
it's communicating. But the reason I put these questions in is because I think any speech can have spirit, a great speaker, MLK at that famous speak, or Gandhi, or on the other side, the leader of the Germans in the Second World War, doing it for evil, but words have the power to entrance people. So I think you have these, you can have words that bring in a spiritual power. So I think what he's saying is that, our words have that power to them.
Even down to the letter itself. Okay.
Yeah, but it's the letters of the Hebrew language that are holy, right?
And I think in some ways, maybe that ties with the illumination.
Yeah,
Because some people can say exactly the same words,
yeah,
but they have absolutely no effect.
yeah, it feels very
Depending on
flat.
the speaker and how you say them.
Yeah,
And maybe that ties with the resonance too, how
Yeah.
you say the words is what creates the power.
and I think you're really right, because you can hear two people talk, give a speech, and they could say even in the same tone, but it will be so much more alive. And what is it that brings it, that it makes it that alive? And I think even for ourselves, we feel that there are periods in our life we're going through a hard time where our own words feel flat and topity, and there's words when we feel really good in ourselves. And then suddenly everything we say, you can feel has life and power to it. And so I think it's a very common experience that our words feel like an extension of our kind of inner state, right? And so that's, when you bring, and so I like this idea of illuminating your words, right? If you can bring light into your words and into your prayer, it gives it that sense of being alive. When I've heard, this is speaking of Shlomo Karlbach, he invented a whole new style of davening and his nigunim, but when he led services, it was like, wow. And I've known a few people who pray in his style, but who have some of his quality, and I can tell you, it's amazing how they can have that ability to take one in prayer.
Engage people, right?
Yeah, it kind of engages people, but it also takes you somewhere, and it's like a whole,
When,
yeah,
if you were to go to
yeah,
one of his services
yeah,
or
some-
service from
yeah,
his disciples, or
Yeah,
whatever
sure,
we're
sure.
calling them,
yeah,
and they're doing the niguns
yeah,
or any prayer, I guess.
yeah,
You've got the leader
yeah,
and then you've got everybody else.
yeah,
Is everybody else singing along?
yeah,
So it's really this whole body of people that are uniting
yeah,
into one,
yeah,
which is something that,
yeah,
I mean, I've never really, when it happens, the rare times it happens,
yeah,
it does have a special feeling,
yeah,
but it's something that I think we're not used to doing,
yeah,
or we're inhibited in doing it.
yeah,
If Cantor Figa started singing, I'd feel odd just trying to join, well, it's one, because of my rotten voice, but just trying to join in,
But that's
except
what we're
where there
trying-
are.
that's exactly what we want,
what we're trying
exactly
to
what we're
do.
trying to do.
I know, well, I understand, but it's,
I
maybe
can't
we
sing
need,
either.
we need
I do it.
encouragement,
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
exactly,
that we can just break into song whenever we want.
Right.
yeah. No, I think,
And we try, it's worked a couple times.
yeah, it's a couple times it's worked. There was a one weekend where I really felt like it was working, and no, it is
But we
different.
get, there's like times where we get welcomed to do it, as opposed to just if the mood strikes.
No, I think it should be, I think that's when prayer comes alive. But the truth is that even in a non-Hasidic, in the Litvak, in the Misnagid service, it's the same thing. You still have singing. They still do Nigunim. They don't quite go as carried away as a Hasidim, but they also have it. The problem what happened in our conservative movement is that the people who were the original leaders in this country, they came already from more of a Mitnagid background, from a Litvak background, which was less emphasis on prayer, more on study. And in their services, I'm sure if you went to JTS, they all were singing in that same way, but it wasn't their focus. So the next generation had it only a little bit and a little bit less. And then by the time you hit the 70s,
lost,
80s,
right?
it got lost. And then we took up, other means, what our neighbors were doing and other, and kind of really Protestant churches where there was, you sit and you listen to somebody else, or maybe that was also from Germany and the Reform movement, but the traditional service was always a service where you do participation, right? It was always, the rumble, the murmur of davening, right? That's the sound of Jewish prayer, right? And when you go to the murmur goes into song and it goes back to murmur and it goes back to back to song, and that's kind of like the mode of Jewish.
Yeah, but it was almost like, okay, let's get this over with so we can go eat lunch.
Yeah.
Trying this new way,
It's
even you're more enthusiastic about
I'm
it.
trying to,
Yeah,
I'm looking, I
Definitely.
want to enjoy it, let's enjoy it, let's, because
Even
then,
if we can't sing well, who
doesn't
cares?
matter, it's not
Yeah.
about create, I think that's where, we're not a choir, we're a group of people praying, so it doesn't matter what we sound like, it's
Yeah,
just about,
Just do it.
and as I said, literally, there's studies that show that when you sing as a group, everybody's tone improves, because you're,
Mhm.
I don't think, we're not trying to create a choir. We're trying to create just
Feeling.
a singing community, yeah, exactly. So, so maybe one has to be willing to open the window in our ark, right? You have to,
Let the
Um,
light.
yeah. But it is. Let's go to the other side. Somebody else, anybody have any comments or thoughts about that teaching or the Baal Shem Tov? It is, I think, well, maybe one last point is that when he's talking about in the words unite and create real unions in the realm of the divine, the person needs to put it, I think what's saying is that our words, when you pray, you can feel like your words are kind of like all coming together in this way. There's a flow of your words. And I think when one is praying and you're in the midst of a song that you feel inspired in, and suddenly you feel like you're not in control of the words anymore. Like it's just, you're kind of swept up. So that's what he's talking about, that feeling of when you're singing a song and you feel like the words are just uniting with each other and creating a whole within themselves without even your input. And so he's talking about that sense of your words, your prayer is kind of taking off. Then you experience unbounded joy and great bliss. Wouldn't that be great, right? All right, next page. Anybody want to read this one? This is another of his teachings on prayer.
I'll read it.
Go ahead, Howard.
In prayer, you must put all your strength into the pronunciation of the words, and you shall go from letter to letter until you forget your physicality. And you think that the letters are combining and joining one to the other, and this is a great joy. If also in the material this is a joy, how much more so in the spirit? And this is the world of formation. And afterwards, you will come to the letters of thought, and you will not hear what you are saying. And this is because you have come to the world of creation. And then you come to the attribute of nothingness, where all your physical powers, senses, are annihilated. And this is the world of emanation, the attribute of wisdom.
He's talking about an experiential journey into prayer, the different states of prayer. Very powerful. But he says how do you begin that journey? By putting all your strength into pronouncing the words. It's so easy to put 10% of your mind on pronouncing the words, and the other 90% is thinking about the kiddush, thinking about your conversation with your, family member like the other day. And there's another 20% of your mind that's thinking about the news, and the other 10%. But if you actually put all your strength into trying to pronounce the words and being present, then you go from letter to letter, then there's something that begins to happen, right? And then you think that the letters are combining. And I think what he said, if also in the material this is a joy, material world that is, how much more so in the spirit? So he's saying that if you force yourself to feel joy, not force yourself, if you make yourself feel joy while you're praying, then also create a spiritual joy in you. So it's kind of like what we're saying, right? If everybody suddenly feels like joyful going to the service and knowing we're all singing joyfully, then there's like a reaction. So you also feel joy in your other parts of yourself. But if you go and you're kind of, if we feel half joyful while you're there, then it's gonna be hard to feel like an inner joy too. So it begins with that physical joy, and it gets to more and more spiritual joy, and eventually you get to a place where you're in the place of nothingness, the capital nothingness, not an absence of everything, but a fullness of everything, which is how the Hasidim see nothingness. We're not aware of your physicality, and then you receive wisdom, which I don't know. Any thoughts or comments on this teaching?
I would like to say that
Sure.
These levels, these worlds of these ascending levels. I know a tiny bit about it because of the Alter Rebbe, I guess that's the Lubavitcher founder.
First Hasidic, yeah, the first Lubavitcher, yeah.
Yes, in his Tanya, because I listened to the whole thing, I think, in a series of podcasts. I must say, it's a whole complicated, a Kabbalistic notion that I don't know how to convey, even the little bit that I tried to take away from it. But people just know that he's talking about a definite set of ideas. How clear they are, I can't say, but
so I can explain the worlds. I can easily explain the world. So the Arizal, Isaac of Luria, created a system where there's 4 basic worlds to go more and more and more from the world of material into the world of spirit. So the first world that we live in is a world of physicality, and then you go to a world where the angels live, but where it's a world of less physicality. Then you go to the world where your thoughts are. It's kind of like a world of spirit, and then you go to world of emanation, which is this absolutely pure spirit. So it's a fairly typical mystical idea that the more you go up into the heavens, the more and more spiritual, pure spirit it is, less physicality, and it's desirable to go more and more into the pure spirit, because you're touching on the essence of things, where there's just pure spiritual love or pure spiritual joy, and you're closer to God, right? So Hasidic prayer is all about the veikut, about linking to God, and if you link yourself to that place, if you get in prayer, what's the purpose of prayer? In some ways, according to them, is that if you get into a really, really deep prayer, and then you touch on that high up heaven where there's just pure spirit, then you create a link to that place, and then you carry that place with you the rest of your day and your life, and that means that it's affecting a transformation within your person, right? Because you have a connection to that place of pure spirit. You're giving it to other people. You're transforming this world. It's helping you with all your problems because you've touched a place of pure love. So all your issues that you have in other ways get worked on and are being. So it's not just you're going there to have some nice experience, but it's transforming your very being because you're connecting to that place. I mean, I think we all experience that on some level. You completely different, but you go to a great concert and suddenly you just feel one with everybody and you feel really good in yourself. You carry that feeling with you for the next few days, right? And you're a more pleasant person and you have a sense of connection or something. So they sense is that if you connect to a really high spiritual place, in prayer, then you take it into your life and it's transforming you and transforming the people in your life. So that's, yeah, it's all a journey, and prayer is your main tool for accessing these areas, these places and these states. And so the Kabbalists divided the heavens into 4 basic worlds. And the whole service, right, there's a whole way of looking at the whole service where different parts of the service connect you to a different world, and there's different special Kabbalistic formulas you can do. I personally don't think that's the way for people in our time to access those worlds. But I think that, for example, if it's a musical Shabbat and you feel carried away into a melody and you're dancing and you're not thinking about how you look or how you appear, but you're just really lost in the melody, you are in fact accessing one of these worlds, right? If you're in prayer and you're just caught up in the singing of it, you're no longer just in the physical world, your spirit is in more of a spiritual world. You're not as aware of your physicality, you're kind of in some other place. So these things happen automatically in prayer. And it's I don't know, does that make some sense? Or
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, of course it does. Is that why there are 3 decks in the ark as referenced in the first reading we did in the Genesis 6:16?
Yeah, I don't, it's a good question. It could be that I'm sure there's some Kabbalists who will tell you what those 3 decks are. But
3 decks
One-
make 4 spaces.
that's true, interesting. Yeah, 4 spaces. So when you have a funeral and you have a practice sometimes of stopping carrying the casket 7 times, have you noticed that on the way to the place you put it down? So one of the interpretations for why you stop it 7 times is because there are 4 worlds, but there's 7 lower Sefirot, right? So each one is 7 heavens. So there's different ways there's 4 heavens or there's 7 heavens, or anyway. But we think about this a lot because you want the person who's passed away to go to the highest heaven, which is the most exalted, blissful, wonderful one. Because the nearest heaven after this one isn't so different from this world. You still have some surahs, you still have some, you still have. So you wanna go as high as you can to the least surahs and the most peace and the most joy and the most. And so if you can connect to those places also in this world, and when you pass away, you're also go more into that. You go to that good place. That's part of the whole thing.
This is helpful. I'm sorry, but I have to leave now. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I felt.
I hope you assent. Okay, let's go to the final one. Would someone like to read the final teaching?
Yeah. Better Shem Tov, 2:4. Baal Shem Tov, foreclosing, and he shall be careful not to fall from this very high thought, the supernal world, to descend below. Rather, he must strengthen himself with all his might to remain on high in his thoughts. And sometimes on high, he can speak without his body, just with his soul, placing him apart from his body. And this is rising above body consciousness, Ishpatu Agashmiyu. And he shall not sense his body at all, or the appearance of this world, only the appearance of higher world. And afterward, when he comes to the world of emanation,
That's the highest world. Yeah.
he will feel nothing but the finest of the fine, that is the emanation of the world. And when he wants to find himself on high, there must be no other person in the house, because even the chirping of birds can cut him off from the higher world. And also the thoughts of another person can cut him off from the higher world. What do you think of such thoughts?
That's so easy to get to.
The question I have is, I know I've read some things that says, if you pray, not just with your head, but you pray with an open heart.
Yeah.
So how does that, because this seems to be very much,
Heady.
cerebral.
Yeah.
And it seems that, Having an open heart is really key, to kind of opening up.
Well, I would say that the open heart and the love aspect is a vehicle to take you to these places much more easily. Because if not, you're in your own head trying to focus, and give yourself a headache. But the open heart helps you journey there or kind of get to that place. I think it's and I think that's part of why the Baal Shem Tov was all about love, as you were saying yourself, right? So what you're saying is that it takes a lot of focus. It takes focus in prayer to achieve these states. And he's talking about a very high state of focus, right? So this is where you're in such a focused place in your mind that, if you hear something, if you hear a bird chirping, something could take you away from that place. Which I think is true in meditation, at least, if you can focus your mind to that place and you're achieving that. It's beautiful. It's something we can't all reach that place, but one more bit of a time. And I think the main takeaway is that it's good to focus in prayer, and I think that's the singing helps, but then there is some work that's required of us to try and stay focused, and not to allow our minds to wander too much, as best we can.
So, Rabbi, how do you relate
Yeah.
the act of singing in congregation,
Yes.
that sort of ecstasy, with
Yeah.
with the last paragraph of the most recent reading, which says
Yeah.
you have to be by yourself.
So it's really interesting, but there's in Chabad, for example, even among the kind of the elite of Chabad, not the Chabad rabbis in the field, but the ones who are at 770 and they're big. Right, Chabad is a huge organization, but so there's a saying that those who are really serious about prayer, they actually don't go to shul sometimes to pray. They stay home and they pray by themselves. Not always, but sometimes, because it helps them to really. That's where they can achieve the highest states of focus. That's a Chabad thing. I don't agree with it. I think that if you pray and you've got a strong mind, you can be really focused within, and you don't even notice the sound of everything around
It's
you.
like the guy that comes here sometimes without his towels because he prayed at home. He doesn't.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So, that's that concept, right?
It is a little bit that concept, yeah, exactly. But
Well, the one thing about that last paragraph that struck me is that it speaks to avoiding all kinds of pretentiousness, where you're out there praying so that other people can watch you pray.
yeah,
It avoids that. It repudiates the sort of self-serving aspect of that.
yeah.
And I
It's
think
not
I think that's something that one sees.
Yeah. I think even, and I've seen this even as I was talking about in these, Shlomo Karlbach and some of the services of his disciples, so to speak, or his students that have that really thing, but it can become a little bit showy, and who's the most showy of the of the group, who shekels in the coolest way,
Was the most devout.
who's the most devout, which is a danger in any religious space, right? So, here, but I think for the Baal Shem Tov was really real, and he did not. And I think in a space where people are sincere, you don't have that because it shouldn't be, but it's hard to avoid it even a little bit, right? And so but you're right. You pray at home, you're not showing off to anybody, right? And you're just. But I think one of the reasons Jewish people don't just pray at home, first of all, it's nice to be in community, but it's also hard to make yourself do it. Not everybody has the discipline to pray by yourself. And when you pray with other people, and there is something beautiful about praying together as well. when, especially when everybody is focused, or when everybody has what Alan was talking about, that feeling of being in a group, and suddenly
It's like there's one person that
Amazing.
comes once in a while who just talks, wants to sit down next to me and talk and never stops, and it's like,
yeah,
you can't focus.
you
on
can't
that.
focus, right? And then you've had a good chat, but the yeah, it's the part of it's the funny joke, which is not so good for the prayer aspect, but the person who doesn't like to pray, and you say, well, you come, well, he says, well, Cohen comes to pray, and I come to talk to Cohen, you know.
How do you reconcile
Yeah,
the praying by yourself
yeah,
with the fact that there are certain prayers we can only say in a
Exactly.
minyan?
yeah. I know, and I think that for those people, they'll still go to minyan for certain things. I mean, I know the opposite. I know people are not Hasidic, but I know when I was at Pardes in Jerusalem, a learning institute, there was a teacher there who, an Orthodox rabbi, who had not missed a minyan for like 20, 30 years, like 3 times a day. And there was one morning where Pardes did not make a minyan. He left. He refused to teach his class because he had to go to another shul to make a minyan, because he was not going to lose his record of missing a 3 times a day minyan. So there are other people who feels more that it's about that way. But these people, they're not St. Kaddish. And so one of the speakers in the documentary, Naftali Citron, I don't know if you mentioned, you notice him, yeah.
I like him.
So he's also a great nephew of Shlomo Carlebach. I'm also a great nephew of Shlomo Carlebach, but he's on the other side. I've never met him, but my father's met him. And he was one of those people who was, some other context I heard, was talking about how, if you're really serious about prayer, you stay home sometimes to pray. But on the other side, this is where I wanted to end. The Baal Shem Tov has the other story, which I mentioned at services last week, which the Baal Shem Tov has a story, right? The one day he was praying and he was going on and on a little bit. And so his Hasidim left. He left the room. And so later in the room, he went back and he rebuked them. He said, how you left the room in the middle of this prayer. Let me tell you a parable. He tells them the prayer of, there was a kingdom where there was a magnificent and rare bird on top of a very high tree. And people wanted to bring down the bird, but nobody could. So the king said, why don't you all go and stand on top of each other's shoulder, one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other. And they did that until they reached the bird, and they were able to bring it back to the court. And so the Baal Shem Tov says to them, when we were praying together, we were creating a ladder, all of us together, from our prayers. We're going higher and higher and higher. But when you all left, our ladder collapsed and we weren't able to bring the beautiful gift to the sovereign of sovereigns. He also taught about, okay, sometimes you're by yourself and you can't hear a bird. But other times, you're collectively bringing some kind of beautiful blessing into the world. And I think that's what we're doing, right? Jewish prayer, we're coming together, and when we're all prayer, when you're one person, one body, and you do that thing, it's not just to make yourself feel good, but you're bringing a blessing into the world. You're bringing a treasure into the world. You're countering some of the forces of, you can feel sometimes a sense of despair and hate in the world, and you counter by bringing joy and love and blessing. So.
I think that sometimes it reminds me of being akin to African American gospel music, where really, yeah. When people are very moved by the singing that they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they fall down.
Sometimes,
Or they just get into it, and there's an alive spirit, right?
Yeah, because they're in the collective voices have more power for an individual, as we've been discussing here. But I mean, to bring in the example of gospel music, not only is it the message, right? The power of the message, the power of the letters, even though it's not in Hebrew, typically it's in English, right?
Yeah,
Although it doesn't have to be. Gospel music is sung in Zulu. Gospel music is sung in all sorts of languages today. So there's something about every individual coordinated, singing the same words, the same
Yeah.
powerful letters, right? At the same time in rhythm that creates a sort of communal power. It's like davening, right?
yeah.
It creates a collective unifying power that not only amplifies the message, but gets into the soul of every participant. And I think that gospel music reference is a good comparison.
I think so too.
There's power in the collective. There's a lot of power in the collective.
And don't you think that each person kind of intuitively knows that they have a part in that, you know, and that even if they, you know, they're not gonna go around talking maybe about the theology of every word, how it does this and this and mystically, but everybody knows that they're adding an oomph into the collective oomph by their, and then everybody's feeling uplifted by it, and it's bringing a blessing into the world, you know, to have that.
Yes, it's like singing with a chorus. I remember singing Chichester Psalms with Jonathan Miller, right? Who's part of your
Yeah.
singing group collective, right? We over at down in Hyde Park at the University of Chicago. It was an amazing experience because there were like 5 choirs singing together at Rockefeller Center these sacred words of the Chichester Psalms, right? Which are in Hebrew, right? In the holy language. And to be able to come together with 100 other voices and lift up those words in this space, it was a transformative experience. So I get it. And that wasn't even gospel music. That was, you know, that was Hebrew sacred.
Fire. Beautiful.
Right?
Well, everybody come on Shabbat. Let's pray. Thank you, Nancy.
It's Friday night or it's Saturday night?
Saturday morning. But
It's
Friday nights are
Saturday
pretty
morning.
cool too. It's Saturday morning, yeah.
Bye.